Hey guys, it's Mrs. Dewar. Today I'm going to introduce to you quadratic equations and just talk about some of the basic concepts that we use when we are dealing with quadratic equations. So the first thing I want to answer is a question probably some of you have. What is a quadratic equation? So a quadratic equation is going to be an equation that contains an x squared. For example, y equals x squared plus 6x minus 9. This is the reason we call it a quadratic equation because the highest power of x is 2. Here's another example. You've got 7x squared. Here's another example. You have 4x squared. So now that you can recognize a quadratic equation, I want to talk about what it means to be in standard form. Standard form of a quadratic equation will always be written the same way. You will have y equals, then you will have your x squared term, then your x term, then your constant. For example. So let's just look at the location of each item. You can see that it starts with y equals, and then you have your x squared term, and then your x term, and then your constant. Now I want to talk about the graph of a quadratic equation. The graph of a quadratic equation always forms something called a parabola. A parabola is a U-shaped figure. Here's an example. Now, as you work with quadratic equations, you'll find that they don't always face upward. If the value of a is positive, and let me pause there and explain what that means. Remember what we said about standard form. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So our a value is 7 in this example. And in this example, my a value is 2. And in this example, it's not written there, but my a value is an understood 1. In all three of those examples, I have a positive a value. When I have a positive a value, the parabola will open upward. And there's an example. The opposite is true if a is negative. So let me show you some examples of what that will look like. In this example, your a value is negative 7. Here, your a value is negative 2. And here, your a value is an understood negative 1. So a quadratic equation with a negative a value will produce a parabola that opens downward. And there's an example. Now, I want to talk about the vertex of a parabola. So to define the vertex is going to be the highest or the lowest point on a parabola. It's also known as the maximum or the minimum. Here's an example of a parabola that has a minimum. The vertex is the very lowest point on the parabola. It's the point at which the parabola turns around and starts moving back up again. That's called the minimum. Here's an example of a parabola that has a maximum. It has a highest point on the graph. Now I'm going to teach you how to calculate the vertex. Since the vertex is just an ordered pair, it is made up of an x and a y value. We begin by getting the x value of the vertex using the formula x equals negative b over 2a. So I'm going to give you a quadratic equation that we can use as an example to show you how this works. In this quadratic equation, my a value is 2, my b value is 8, my c value is negative 1. So I'm just going to list those over here on the right. Now you'll notice that the c doesn't really help us when we're working with a vertex, so I just kind of put that to the background, and I'm going to focus on a is 2 and b is 8, and I'm going to replace those values in the equation. Now, 2 times 2, of course, is 4, and this whole thing divides to give me negative 2. So that is the first part of my vertex. Now I need a y value. And as always, once I know what x is, I could just sub it into the equation to figure out what y is. So I'm going to take that original equation, and I'm going to replace both of my x's with the negative 2 that I just found out was its value. And then just apply your order of operations to simplify this. I'll square that -2 to make that 4. I'll multiply everything and combine it all, and I get -9. So once I know my x value and then my y value, I have an ordered pair. So my vertex would be -2, -9. Now I want to talk about axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is an imaginary line through a parabola such that each side is a mirror image of the other, meaning that if you were to fold the parabola on that line, the left and the right side would match up. So here's an example of a parabola, and the axis of symmetry would be right down the middle. Now we're going to talk about graphing quadratic equations. Now, we're going to just learn how to sketch a graph in this video, and if you're interested in getting a more detailed graph, a more accurate graph, that's going to happen in the next video. But today I'm just going to take some of those terms that I explained to you, and we're going to talk about how we can get a quick, rough sketch of a parabola using the vertex and knowing whether it opens upward or downward. So the first thing I'm going to do is determine whether it opens upward or downward, and we talked about that based on the A value. The second part is going to be to calculate and plot the vertex, and then we're just going to sketch a graph. Here is an example. So I'm going to go through each of these steps one at a time, starting whether or not the graph will open upward or downward. So to know that, I'm going to have to look at the A value. So keep in mind, when the A value is positive, the graph opens upward. So I already have a picture in my head coming together of what this may look like. Next, I'm going to calculate and plot the vertex. Now, we actually just did this one, so I'm going to bring back the work that we just did and show you that our vertex was -2, -9, and I'm going to plot a rough sketch of where that would be. Next, I'm going to sketch the axis of symmetry, which is that imaginary line through the vertex. Now, we said earlier that this is going to open upward, so I'm just going to sketch the parabola opening upward from that vertex point. Again, this is a rough sketch. If you want a more detailed graph, you're going to need to get some ordered pairs, and that we'll do in our next video. So that about covers the introduction of graphing quadratic equations and some of the terminology. Click the like button. Consider subscribing to Making Algebra Fun for more videos. If you'd like the notes to go along with this video, click on the link below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.